My name is Ethan. I'm 28 years old. Following my divorce, I relocated to a small town called Chatham in Alabama. With nowhere else to go besides my parents' home, I settled into my grandfather's old house. He passed away a few years back and left the property to our family. It's located about 10 minutes outside of town, set on 10 acres enveloped by dense forest. The area is incredibly serene. I thought I'd appreciate the tranquility. The house itself is aged. Its wooden floors groan underfoot, and the doors often jam. It's the sort of place that always feels chilly, no matter how high you set the heater. Still, it was free, and I didn't have any better options. The first few nights were uneventful. I unpacked my belongings and tidied up. Evenings were spent on the porch, sipping a beer. It was calm. No cars, just the breeze rustling through the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. But then, strange sounds began. The first time I noticed it was on the 7th night. I'd just climbed into bed around midnight, nearly asleep when I heard whistling outside. It wasn't a familiar melody, just a slow, uneven tune, slightly off-pitch. It sounded like someone strolling through the woods behind the house, whistling as they moved. It unnerved me, but I assumed it was a hunter or a neighbor who'd had too much to drink. The following night, it happened again. Same time, same tune, but this time it felt nearer. I got up, switched on the porch light, and peered outside, but saw no one. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the yard to investigate. Nothing. No footprints, no rustling of someone fleeing, just the whistling, growing fainter as it retreated into the forest. I tried to brush it off. For a couple of nights, I stayed in bed, attempting to sleep through it. But every night, the whistling began around 1:17 a.m. I know that seems oddly specific, but it was always between 1:15 and 1:19, like it was timed. It felt deliberate, as if someone was targeting me, knowing I was alone. A few days later, I contacted the sheriff's office. An older deputy, who I'll call Deputy M, came out. He'd been on the force for years. When I described the issue, he grew silent. He said, almost verbatim, "Your granddad used to report the same thing. Said someone was whistling around his land late at night, always in the spring. We never found anything. I thought it was just old age, but now you're hearing it too." That rattled me. I had no clue my grandfather experienced this. Deputy M advised me to lock the doors and stay indoors after sunset. I was already doing that, but I became more vigilant. I checked every window twice. One night I even wedged chairs against the doorknobs for extra security. Still, the whistling persisted, growing closer each night. One evening, it came from behind the shed. It was louder than before, as if the person was standing just outside. I grabbed my flashlight and peeked through the blinds. I saw nothing but didn't dare step outside. The next night, I heard it from the front porch, right by the entrance. 3 long whistles, then silence. The night after, it came from beneath the floorboards. I'm certain of it. It sounded like someone was in the crawl space, whistling up through the vents. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I rummaged through the attic, searching for anything my grandfather might have left behind. I found a box containing his diaries. He documented the whistling, noting it occurred every spring for over a decade. He didn't know who was responsible, but suspected someone was observing the house. He mentioned keeping a rifle by the front door for protection. He wrote that it only happened when he lived alone, after my grandmother's passing. I called Deputy M again. He visited and read the diary entries, looking uneasy. He told me to stay cautious. He said, "Don't open the door unless you know who's there." That night, I stayed awake. I sat on the couch, a shotgun resting across my knees, one I barely knew how to handle. I waited. At 1:17 a.m., the whistling started, but this time it wasn't outside. It came from inside the house, echoing down the hallway. I froze. The hallway was unlit. I could hear the whistling approaching, step by step. I stood, aimed the shotgun, and yelled, "Who's there?" The sound ceased. I switched on the hallway light. No one was there. Nothing. I didn't sleep again after that. 2 nights have passed since, and I hadn't heard it again. I was falling apart, feeling sick. I didn't know who this person was or why they targeted me and my grandfather, but it was real. I don't believe in hallucinations that vivid, nor do I believe in the supernatural. This was a person. After that night, things went silent for 2 days. No noises, no movement, no signs of anything. I hoped it was over. On the third night, I went to bed just after midnight. I didn't stay up this time, but left the hallway light on for safety. At exactly 1:17 a.m., I was jolted awake by a new sound. Not whistling, knocking. Slow, deliberate knocks. 3 of them. They came from inside the house, from the back door. Then quiet. I stayed still in bed, listening. A minute later, I heard another sound, a floorboard creak in the hallway. Then another. Someone was moving. The hallway light went out. I grabbed my shotgun, heart racing, and stepped into the hallway. It was dark, but at the far end, I saw something. A figure dressed in black with a pale face. They stood motionless, watching me. I raised the shotgun, but my hands trembled. I tried to speak. My throat was parched. I raised the shotgun, but my hands were trembling. I shouted, "Don't move!" my voice quivering. In the darkness, I saw the figure slowly lift their leg, turning as if preparing to bolt. I yelled, "Stop!" And at that moment, they dashed out of the hallway, out of sight. I heard their heavy footsteps thundering toward the front door, vanishing into the night. I ran outside and fired a shot, not skyward, but straight into the darkness, half hoping I'd hit them. I screamed, "Stay away!" The gunshot rang in my ears, echoing off the house and porch. I locked the house, jumped in my truck, and drove to town. I slept in my truck that night. The next morning, Deputy M went to the house and found the front door unlocked again. That proved whoever it was had a key to my grandfather's house. Nothing was damaged or stolen, but Deputy M suggested changing the locks. Off the record, he also advised me to leave the place, saying someone in those woods didn't want my grandfather or me there. I drove to the local hardware store and replaced the locks that same hour. After that, I left the house and went to my parents' home out of state for a while. I left it to my dad to sell the property eventually. We removed anything of sentimental value, and the rest was either left behind or sold. My dad never brought up the fact that some unsettling stranger had been lurking around the house for decades, it seems. How they got a key, who they were, or why my grandfather kept it a secret, I'll never know. It all troubles me profoundly. I believe it was likely some troubled individual living in a nearby home. Eventually, I relocated to a more populated city. That ordeal left me too shaken to stay in an isolated area. I'm 16 now and live in the city, but I spent the first 8 years of my life in a rural area. For some, it might seem odd that I was allowed to roam the small village unsupervised from a young age. The place was tiny, with a population of about 90 people at most. Everyone knew everyone else. So much so that my friends and I memorized the license plates of cars and who they belonged to. One sweltering summer day, my friend, who I'll call Lucas, and I were desperate for some Pepsi. Back then, soda was dirt cheap at the local corner stores, but we needed just a few more coins to scrape together enough for 2 cans. Fortunately, an elderly woman called out to us from her porch. She said she was preparing lemonade for everyone since her anniversary was coming up. The problem was she'd run out of mint leaves, so she offered that if we could fill 2 plastic bags with mint, she'd buy us as much soda as we wanted. Lucas and I thought it was a fantastic deal, as I didn't want to ask my parents for cash. Later that day, we got to work. The sun scorched our faces, and our shirts were drenched in sweat. We hunted for mint, but despite our efforts, we barely filled half of 1 bag. We were both irritated, knowing we'd never gather enough leaves before dusk. Still, we kept wandering and searching, hoping for a miracle, a patch bursting with plants. Out of nowhere, 2 tall figures approached us. When I say tall, they were probably around 5 feet 7 inches, but to our 7-year-old eyes, they loomed like giants. What struck me most was their attire, head-to-toe black, with oversized hoodies and snug jeans. Neither seemed older than 17, though their faces were hard to make out. They spoke in a friendly, almost playful tone, their words carefully chosen to seem harmless. "You kids out here by yourselves?" Lucas glanced at me, looking uneasy, and made a subtle gesture to leave. Sadly, I was never good at reading body language, so I missed his cue. I turned back to the 2 guys and, in a chipper voice, said, "Yeah, we're looking for mint plants. Do you know where we can find a bunch? We've been searching forever and we're exhausted." I'm not certain, but I have a faint memory of one of them smirking when I mentioned what we were after. One of them knelt beside me and ruffled my hair. Lucas quickly stepped closer, tugging me back slightly when he saw the guy touch me. His face was stern, almost panicked, and he asked, "Who are your folks?" Where I grew up, that question meant answering with your family's last name, since the community was so small and few new families existed. It was a common way to trace someone's lineage. Lucas, born and raised in the countryside, knew the locals far better than I did. I suspect he was alarmed because he didn't recognize these two, and their interest in two young kids, alone, with one even touching me, raised a red flag. As he feared, they dodged the question, focusing on me instead. "You know, I've seen a huge patch of mint. See that hill over there? That's where we're from. If you want, we can take you there and help you fill those bags, maybe even more." We knew that hill well. Lucas, I, and other kids played tag in its woods at night, and it was a blast I can't even put into words. But I'd never once seen a mint field there. The only crops around were wheat, berries, and some pumpkins. Being a naive kid, I ignored all the warning signs. I nodded enthusiastically, pulling Lucas by the arm to follow. The guys looked pleased and started leading the way. We walked farther and farther from the village, and I felt Lucas's hand trembling in mine. By then, a chill ran through me. The village was completely out of sight. The forest loomed ahead, and there was no sign of any mint field. I tried asking where we were headed, but they gave vague replies like, "You'll see," or "Just wait." Sweat beaded on my forehead, and I slowed my pace. Panic surged through me, and I realized something bad was coming, but for some reason, I couldn't stop walking. I knew if either of us tried to turn back, something terrible would happen. Then, quietly, Lucas leaned toward my ear. I still get goosebumps recalling this so clearly. He whispered as softly as possible, "Something's off with these guys. Run." That was the last thing I heard before Lucas bolted downhill, his hand never leaving mine for a second. I ran like my life depended on it, and it probably did. I heard the two guys swear, and soon their footsteps pounded behind us. I sobbed loudly, terrified, but didn't stop. I'm sure I wasn't even breathing, and I can't fathom how I sprinted nearly 2 kilometers back to the village without pausing. The woman who'd asked for the mint spotted us, drenched in sweat and tears. Our faces were ashen, like all the blood had drained from us. At some point, as we neared the village, the guys must have stopped chasing us. She calmly brought us inside and gave us some candy to calm down. She asked what happened, and Lucas explained, since I was too shaken to speak. When he finished, she gave us a concerned look and scolded us for being so foolish. "Well," she scolded Lucas as he lied, saying I hadn't wanted to follow them and he'd insisted on trusting the guys. After that, he was grounded for a month while I needed weeks to recover from the trauma. I never learned who those guys were or what they wanted. Now, older, I can guess, and it unsettles me deeply. While running, I could have easily tripped and fallen, since sprinting downhill at that speed was dangerous. If not for Lucas, who's now my boyfriend, I shudder to think what those guys might have done to us. My parents worked long hours when I was young. They each held 2 jobs to support me and my older brother, Caleb. Their work kept us afloat, but it meant they were rarely home, so they found a babysitter online. She was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, named Sarah. For about 4 or 5 months, Sarah came over every weekday to watch us. At 7, and with Caleb at 8, we adored having Sarah around. She was youthful, kind, and full of energy, which meant we had a blast playing with her, unlike some older sitter who'd be grumpy or tired. Caleb and I did online schooling, as regular school was too tough for my parents to manage. Sarah helped a ton with that. When summer rolled around, my parents told Sarah to take a break. They wanted her to enjoy a summer vacation after all her hard work, but that left us without a sitter for the season. My parents didn't want to hunt for another trustworthy sitter, so they decided to take Caleb and me to our grandparents' place. They lived in rural Texas, a bit far from our home in Oklahoma, but the drive was worth it since we'd stay all summer. That weekend on Saturday, we hit the road. The drive was scenic, but to young me, it was an endless, queasy ordeal. We finally arrived at my grandparents' house after what seemed like an eternity. It was a cozy, cabin-style home nestled in a wide, open field with woods encircling the back. A short distance away stood a barn-like structure housing animals like cows, goats, chickens, and other fascinating creatures. We exchanged greetings, and immediately my grandpa wanted to show Caleb and me around the property. My parents stayed inside, chatting with my grandma as she prepared dinner. The evening was wonderful. We caught up with our grandparents and played with their dog, Bella. When bedtime came, Caleb and I shared a room with bunk beds and a small TV. The room next door was where my parents slept. Exhausted from the drive, they fell asleep quickly, needing to head home the next day for work on Monday. Caleb and I stayed up a bit longer, watching cartoons on the TV. Eventually, we drifted off with the TV still on. Around 2 a.m., I was startled awake by the sound of heavy footsteps outside my window. The blinds blocked my view, so I couldn't see anything. The footsteps didn't wake Caleb, as the TV was still playing, but I heard them clearly. Then came a strange noise from the window, followed by a grunt after a couple of seconds. It sounded like someone was trying to pry it open. I rushed to my parents' room to wake them and explain. They were skeptical, thinking it was just my imagination, but they checked anyway. Nothing was there. They dismissed it as an animal noise. After all, we were in the middle of nowhere. Maybe my young mind was overreacting. I fell back asleep after lying there for 5 minutes. In the morning, I woke to the mouth-watering aroma of my grandma's breakfast as my parents packed to leave. We ate together, then they drove off. Afterward, my grandpa took Caleb and me to feed the animals while walking Bella. I asked to hold Bella's leash, and my grandpa handed it to me, warning me to grip it tightly. As we strolled along the path, I kept having to tug Bella every few seconds. When I finally checked why she wasn't moving, I saw her staring intently into the woods. I hesitated but followed her gaze. There, half hidden behind a tree, stood a dark figure watching us. Though cloaked in black, I could feel their eyes on us. Their hands gripped the tree, as if peeking out with their whole body. I turned to tell my grandpa, but he and Caleb were already about 15 feet ahead. I ran to catch up, dragging Bella along, but when I told my grandpa about the figure in the woods, it was gone. It was as if they'd never been there. I thought I'd have seen them run off, but where could they have gone? My grandpa knew about the previous night's incident, so he didn't think I was joking. I could see worry in his eyes, but he reassured me, saying it was probably a deer in the distance that fled when I ran. After feeding the animals, we returned to the house. The rest of the day was spent watching movies and playing in the sprinklers. That night, my grandma cooked an incredible dinner. The meal was hearty, and I was exhausted afterward. I took a quick 10-minute bath and headed to the room I shared with Caleb. We watched cartoons for a while before falling asleep. Around 1 a.m., I was woken by humming outside the window. It was the theme song from Fetch, with Ruff Ruffman, the show playing on the TV. Caleb, a deep sleeper, didn't stir, and the blinds still blocked my view, but I was certain it was a person. At first, I thought it might be my grandpa outside smoking, humming the tune because he heard it through the window. It was a silly idea, but as a kid, I called out, "Grandpa?" The humming stopped. After 30 seconds of silence, a voice said, "Hey, it's Grandpa. Come outside, kid. I've got something neat to show you." I slipped on my shoes and went out. There were no lights, but the night sky was breathtaking. I reached the window and saw my grandpa standing there. He extended his hand for me to take. I grabbed it, and he led me toward the barn. I tried asking where we were going, but he didn't respond. Doubts crept in. Why would my grandpa be out at 1 a.m. showing me something? Why was he wearing a hooded sweater? Then I looked closely at his hand and realized it wasn't my grandpa's. It belonged to someone younger. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. I stayed silent, not wanting to alert him that I knew something was wrong, though my heart raced. Then I noticed a long handle protruding from the back of his pants. Panic surged. Suddenly, my grandpa's voice called from the house. I didn't respond, but the man turned toward the sound. In that split second, I wrenched my hand free and stepped back. The man froze for a moment, then sprinted toward the woods. I bolted for the house, screaming for help. When I got inside, my grandpa was there, arms open, and my grandma was on the phone with the police. Soon after, officers arrived and searched the area. They found the man hiding in a ditch near the house. In the ditch were items he'd taken from the barn, and most chillingly, they said he had a hatchet tucked into his pants. Further investigation revealed the lock on my grandpa's shed had been broken, leaving it open for anyone to take what they wanted. The shed held tools that could have caused serious harm. A few days later, my grandpa learned the man was Sarah's ex-boyfriend, who I'll call Ryan. Ryan confessed to stalking us and planning to abduct me that night. He thought a young girl would be an easier target. He admitted he wanted to use me to manipulate Sarah, knowing she cared deeply for me, to force her to do what he wanted. Ryan claimed he wanted to reconcile with Sarah and start a new life together, insisting he never intended to harm me. After the incident, our parents picked up Caleb and me a week later and began searching for better jobs to spend more time at home. They also let Sarah go, which made sense. I'm so grateful the police station was close to my grandparents' house. Above all, I'm thankful my grandpa woke up that night to use the bathroom. Even after 20 years, the thought of what could have happened still sends shivers down my spine.